Good day to everyone. We are here for such a special occasion. At this month at King Ark Baptist Church, we've been concentrating on leadership, and this has transitioned into a special refuel where we're going to be able to talk to one of the pioneering leaders here at the King Ark Baptist Church, one of the longest serving pastors of this church, a visionary in this country, in the British Virgin Islands, and what we call an ambassador for what it means to be a senior pastor and a Christian leader in a modern time. Today we have the privilege of interviewing and talking to and learning from none other than the senior pastor of the King Ark Baptist Church, Reverend Dr. Melvin Turnbull. And this is a very special occasion for me because of the executive pastor, not only under his leadership, but also his son. So if I get a little teary-eyed, please bear with me. And we're in a live studio audience. They're here to support us. You hear from their claps? So we look forward that this conversation, whether you're a leader in a church, in a business, in your home, one thing about leadership principles, they transcend no matter where you are. So we hope you will join us, share the conversation, and we will grow from this. So I want to say welcome to our stage, not as this is your stage as well, but welcome to this conversation on tonight. We are so honored that you've taken the time to, now you usually do the interviewing. I'm sure this is a little bit interesting to be interviewed on this way, which you've been interviewed before on many stages. We want to say welcome to you.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to call you Dr. Mike. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
It's a pleasure to be there. It's actually a humbling experience as I sit here and reflect on where I've come from. It's a real humbling experience to see you here and you being groomed and getting ready to take over.
The tears are not supposed to start till after. All right, so the tears are not supposed to start till after. But we're so honored that you are here. So we're going to jump right into it, if that's okay.
Sure. Can I do this?
Yes,
because
of course.
Tomorrow is our anniversary.
Yeah.
And I took the time out to be here tonight. So it's special. Yeah. So I want to wish my wife a very happy 43rd anniversary.
So whenever this... So when this is aired, you'll timestamp it. And when this recording took place, that he was about to celebrate his anniversary on the following day, and we were here to have a great time of conversation, and then you have a little bit of respite. That's going to be an important topic about rest and balance as a leader as we go down in our conversation.
Most definitely.
All right. So to jump right into it, did you always want to be a leader?
That's a good question. No, I was actually thrust into it. I guess someone would say I had all the makings of a leader because it started very early. From as early as about 7 years, I can recall doing things that children ought not to be doing. And I remember when I was about 12, 13, I was called in, and I actually sat my father and mother down and counseled them. I don't know what I said, but it seemed to work because everything seemed to be better after that.
Yeah.
My first experience actually started with goats, believe it or not. And so I had goats, used to take care of them. I was about maybe 7 and going on to 10, taking care of goats. They were well trained though. They were the kind of goats that I could just give directions to and they will follow.
Yeah. And that's how leadership works.
That's how I started.
That's how leadership works for everything, right?
But the truth is, you're not a leader unless you're a follower.
Yeah.
You can call yourself a leader, but if you have no following, you're not a leader. You're just fooling yourself. Yeah. So the sheep, or the goats rather, is where I started. And it's also where I started not just leading, but also preaching. And I can remember, I can see myself on top of this huge rock, just preaching to my goats. And they would stay right there and listen. Yeah. And when it was time in the afternoon to go home, I would just let them out and they would just go right. And I used to show off. I get by my godfather and I say, stop. and they would stop.
Yeah.
You know, so they were obedient, not much like the sheep we have today.
Well, well, let's not. We have people here. So, in terms of leadership, you talk about it, when you think about it, how many years would you say you've been in formal leadership here at the King Ark Baptist Church and in your life?
Formally, I think it started in 1968, because once I renewed my faith in Christ in 1968, I right away got busy and never stopped. So I started leading a youth fellowship along with Pastor Liebert and some other brothers, and we were there. That's how I grew up. No one had to tell us to do anything. We took the initiative. We saw a need, we filled it. Because I always tell people, if you are the one seeing the need, it just may be that God wants you to do something about it.
Yeah. So in terms of leadership, starting at around 17, 18 years old, I'm sure there's so many lessons of leadership that you've learned. I want you to start to share some of those.
Yeah.
But as you think about when you were starting to say that you're a leader, how did you know you were a leader?
Well, I never called myself a leader. I just did what I thought God wanted me to do. Leadership, though, I want to explain to somebody who might be struggling with this. Leadership is defined in my book as being able to influence. It is the ability to influence others.
So so leadership can be used to influence for good,
exactly,
and for bad.
Yes.
So a lot of people have leadership skills and qualities and the ability.
Exactly.
But how you choose to use it becomes
exactly. So I didn't qualify it yet, because all you need to be a leader is to have influence, and the purest form of leadership is by inspiration. When you're able to inspire others to do that which they normally wouldn't do or think they cannot do, and if you're really good at it, they even enjoy doing it in the process.
Yeah.
And so that's for me what leadership is. And I find in this day and time especially, and even growing up, that people who are not able to influence others have a tendency to resort to manipulation, intimidation, and also seduction.
Yeah.
And I also discovered, I was sitting in my office the other day and looking at life and looking at what's going on, and I found out now that manipulation has a new face. It's called the victim syndrome. When leaders are now called out to question and to give an account, they're called foul.
Yeah.
They become the victim. And the truth of the matter is, people are hurting, and hurting people hurt people. And as a leader, you don't have the luxury of saying, oh, poor me.
Yeah.
Do the work that you're called to do.
So, now you are a seasoned leader, but I want to go back in time.
Okay.
Early. Did you make mistakes as a leader early on? Did you always have it laid out? Were there mistakes along the way?
I don't have it laid out now.
Really?
I don't have it together.
So
let me just tell you the truth of the matter is, there were times, and even now, when I don't even know what the next step is. That may sound strange to a whole lot of folks. A leader is not necessarily one who has it together. But you see, if you are going to be a leader, you have got to be under a leadership. I tell folks all the time, you should not be in authority unless you're under authority. So as I follow my leader, which is God, and I have also other mentors, then I understand the importance of leading others, because if I can't be obedient, why should I expect others to be obedient? So yes, I have made mistakes. I can't remember what they are, but I'm sure I have made mistakes along the way. But the truth of the matter is, no matter what mistakes I may have made, I have found myself to be open, to be accessible, and to be corrective. And so I never thought and never feel that I have it all together.
So leadership is not about perfection?
No, it's not about perfection at all. You check out the Bible, for example, and even in modern day times, the people that God called, and here's the important thing. God, if we're talking about God and spiritual leadership, God calls us as leaders from among the people. And that is critical to understand. He doesn't take you from the sky. That's not where you were. He takes you from among the people, selects you, and decides whether you think you should or can or not. I want you to do this. Another thing we'll discover about this same leadership is that your leadership is not far removed from your lifestyle. There's a certain trend. God has never really called anybody while they're just sitting down there asking. It is while you do what you know that God reveals what you don't know.
Yeah. So this is getting good already. And if you think about it in terms of how you lead and being called out from where you are, that means that if you're under, even if in secular world, wherever you are, but especially in church, in Christian church, that God could call anyone from any seat in the church, outside in the parking lot, in usher ministry, to lead.
Most definitely.
Because some people think that leadership is qualified just for the pastor.
No. He calls you from among the people. I want to develop this because it's important for those who are struggling. He calls you from among the people, which means they know you. You hung out with them. You were their colleagues and all that. And now to make that switch and that transition is difficult.
Yeah.
Because they're going to tell you, I know when you, this is way back at the time, when you walk with no pants on, just a shirt.
Yeah.
I know you this and I know, and they also know all your mistakes and maybe all your secrets. How do you distance yourself from that? So here's the key. And I tell young people this, and young leaders in particular this often, because it's critical, that as a leader, you ought to be close enough to the people you lead to pick up their heartbeats, but yet far enough not to compromise yourself nor your conviction.
So that means as a leader,
and it's difficult to balance.
You have to be able to find and first know who you are.
Exactly.
So what are some of those things that you discovered about who you were as a leader? Because every leader has different proclivities and different strong suits that they accentuate. What are your strong suits as a leader?
Yeah, well, I think it was always talking.
Yeah. Well, we know that, Pastor.
Now watch yourself here. It was always talking. I had this ability to talk. But not only that, things that people struggled with sort of came to me naturally. And I can remember many instances. For example, we had a school trip. This was in high school. Went to the radio station, ZBVI. And as I hit the door and I opened my mouth and hailed the gentleman, he said, "You should be on radio." I said,
so wait, this is very phenomenal. So I know we're talking about leadership, but I think all of us here are interested because as your son, I grew up hearing you on the radio. So I thought you always were on the radio. It was very interesting. When I was younger, I was like, well, how is he coming through the speaker? And I just saw him. You know, I was like, this is weird. Like, and every Friday night, but I used to like the radio because every Friday night, I know when the radio's finished, unless you were there talking with the fellas on Friday or Saturday, that we will get some jerk chicken from Dario's. And when I used to hit the truck driving, I used to be like, yes, chicken is on the way, right? So this started, you're saying, when you were in high school, well, under the age of 17, you opened your mouth and somebody identified a gift in you.
Yes, he did. And I was going to sign up, but at that time it was purely secular. And one of the things that distinguishes me is that I have always told myself, as I promised the Lord, that I would not get involved in anything to compromise my convictions. So as much as I liked radio, it was not at that time, and you have to understand the time in which that was, where I told the story several times. I was struggling with what you do and what you don't do, because at that time, Christianity was more a set of rules of do's and don'ts, and more don'ts than do's. And so, living in that culture, it was difficult to cross over and say, well, I'm going to be a DJ, because that's all they played, what they would call trail day. You know that term?
Yeah. Well,
okay. Bennett.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, you're not too young.
Yeah, more like it's really live in St. Thomas and USVI still. Yeah.
Okay. So he identified and said, you should be on radio. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of folks didn't know this. Up until I got saved, I was very, very shy fellow. I was a very shy fellow. But after I got saved, there came a boldness that I couldn't understand nor explain. And so when I see people, I can talk to anybody. I respect them, but never afraid of them. And so God give me all that. All these are qualities of leadership. I hope you're picking them up as I go.
So let me ask you, let me split it up because, you know, this is fundamental. You now, full-blown leadership, have pastored hundreds and thousands of people over your time as a senior pastor. Talked to, you've been on international stages and this and other. And no one would have thought at the beginning of your journey in leadership that God chose someone who was shy and didn't speak. Right. What does that say about God and choosing leaders?
I think it ought to be comforting for all of us. The truth of the matter is, God doesn't usually call the qualified, but he qualifies the one he calls. And so when you think of people like Moses, it's ironic. God's going to call you to do a speaking job when you can't speak. He's going to call you to do a writing job when you can't write. The thing that you think you can't do, especially as a spiritual leader, that seemingly is especially where God likes to call you. Because the truth of the matter is, God likes to show off. He likes to show himself strong in the earth. And when we read the scripture in 1 Corinthians, it says, you've seen your calling, brethren, not many noble, not many this. It is not that you have it all together. It's not that you know everything. But as long as you are yielded and pliable in the hand of God, there is no telling where he will take you. So you have to keep that humility and that obedience about you so that when things take off, you don't do what Nebuchadnezzar did, say it's all me. So for me, it's never about me. Leadership ought never to be about me. And so because of that, I have developed what I have dubbed a reproductive style. Never afraid to lose my job, to work myself out of a job, always trying to empower the people around me, because I understand that I'm not going to be here forever. So what I need to do is to prepare the people, not so much for my presence, but for my absence, so that there be an ongoing continuity.
So you recognize that your leadership position, especially in Christian church, was given to you by God.
Most definitely.
And it's not about you. So the church is not yours.
It's not my church.
It's not about you. It's about God. And your philosophy is, how can I make sure this can continue when I'm present or away? So leadership not only requires you to allow God to use you, it not requires you to have a standard by which you said. It also requires you to have a balance, which you mentioned, but also the humility of being able to be a leader. In modern day times, humility is not something, that you really find, because leadership, especially in the modern day with social media and popularity, that you have to be in the forefront all the time. And as a leader, sometimes you can lead from the front and the back.
Of course.
So what do you think about that?
Most definitely. And again, I like what you just said, because that has been my style. I tell folks all the time, if you have to say that you're the leader, you're probably not the leader. If you always have to be the one sticking out, preeminent, something is wrong with that picture. You can lead from the back, you can lead from the middle, you can just lead. But there are some of us who have this ego that we got to be in the front. We got to have the last say. We got to be the last one to come in so that everybody can provide a seat for us and everybody can notice that we're coming in. When the truth of the matter is, I take my cue from Jesus. He was so down to earth with all that power. Look at how powerful it was. that even when they wanted to arrest him, they couldn't go in that group and say, that's Jesus.
Yeah.
Because he was so much a part of them, looked like them, behaved like them, to the point where Peter couldn't understand when he says, I need to wash your feet tonight. Peter said, no, wait, that don't work like that. You know Peter, of course.
Yeah.
And so the truth is, when we understand that it's not about us,
Yeah.
then we will become more effective.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's a very good trait. You have to mature. Now, if you're given, talking in terms of your journey as an early leader going forward, what are some of the hard lessons that you learned?
Yeah.
At starting off.
Well, some of the hard lessons I learned, and I was, as it were, baptized by fire, because I was very young. All the people that I was called to lead were older than I was. So here am I, a young boy, young Christian. I needed what I would say guidance. I needed someone who would mentor me. And here's the thing, God says to me, he took me right into Timothy. He says, when I was looking for somebody who could depend on, because it was not the best of times when I was called to leadership. The church was in turmoil. As you may know or may not know, Baptist was relatively new to the BVI. You're talking about the 60s. And so there were only two churches here, Methodist, Baptist. And so everybody was Methodist before. And so when the Baptists came, of course, it's a new phenomenon, and anything new always is viewed at with skepticism.
Yeah.
So here we are. The church now is in turmoil. The pastor's no longer there. I have to take over. And everybody around says, he can't do it. It's going to fail. He's going to flop. But I remember what Gamaliel said.
So you started leadership
in
doubt. People who you were supposed to lead didn't really, they were questioning if you were able to do it.
It was not so much the congregation, it was the people around.
Oh.
And to say it's not going to last, but I remember what Gamaliel said. Gamaliel said to the people who were about to beat the disciples and throw them out, he said, listen, if this thing is not of God, it will flop. But if it be of God, be careful. So you don't know the many times I thank God, as we alluded to earlier, I thank God that the church is not mine. It's God's church. And I go on the promise that he made. I have established my church, and not even the gates of hell can prevail against it. So what has made me strong is to stand on the word. Now, the process has not always been easy.
I was going to ask you.
But I kick back to the promise.
How did you deal with the naysayers?
Well, Jeremiah.
Was it hard?
It was hard, but not hard, because I learned how to be disciplined early, very disciplined. And for me, it was never about the people, never about the crowd. It was always having an ear for what God wants me to do. I had that sensitivity to God. So I realized that he called me, and I took that wherever I went. Even in my quote-unquote secular job, whenever I go to any job, I said, you didn't hire me, you can't fire me. Boldly.
Yeah.
But I didn't do anything to be fired. I made sure I operated in excellence, but always understood that no matter what my resources may be, God is my source. And I never feared, because I know he always will provide. So when it came to the church and all the criticism that may have come, I was not worried about that, because I trusted in the promise. Sure, I had concerns because some people were very fickle. One of the lessons I learned is not everybody who says they're with you is with you. You must never take what everybody says. And if everybody likes you, there's a problem right there. So some of the lessons I've learned is you've got to trust God, even when you can't trace him.
What does that mean? Was there times in your leadership, in pastoring, and early on, not to say that you're questioning God, but your human side was like, I'm going to just pick up my family and just move to Salt Island?
Yeah. Well, the truth is, it never happened to me. Now, it may sound strange to some people. I've had, for example, many opportunities to quit, to leave. I remember one gentleman, he's now deceased, Jay Wimberly. He was my professor when I was doing work at the School of Theology.
Yes.
He's since passed. He came here early, I think could have been late 60s, early 70s. He saw right away the potential in me, and he wanted to take me up and carry me to school, just like that. All expenses paid, no questions asked. And I said, no, here's where I belong. I had many opportunities to pastor in the United States and elsewhere. Even locally, I've had people who approach me from different denominations to stand out in particular. Everything, anything you want, Pastor Mel, Pastor Turnbull, whatever they call me, we'll do it, we'll give it to you. And I said, first of all, I got to be true to God. I don't believe what you believe. My understanding of Scripture is different from yours. So as attractive as that is, I just can't do it. I can't do it. So I never felt a sense of just getting up and going.
But you
yes,
had,
there were
but you had
temptations
moments to want to, not say temptations, but there were people that approached you to try to move you from your wall,
exactly.
as Nehemiah, to want to bring you down.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Nehemiah.
Yeah.
I understood very early where my wall was.
Yes.
And I don't have time to come down.
Yeah.
And so
what was that lesson, again, for a young leader, someone watching this, in terms of when you're starting off, people see your gifts, your talents, your potential, but God has told you to go to this small brook. If
I'm with you.
I know. If you go to this small brook, you pass the big river on the left, where He sends you to a small brook to go there, to show you that if you could just concentrate and be disciplined in the small things.
Yes, exactly. And so, again, I grew up in humble beginnings. God did a work in me. I'm telling you. It was preceded by 4 years of struggle. Some people don't know the story. So let me briefly tell it. When I got saved in 1964, between 64 and 68, I struggled with my identity because, again, nobody took the time to mentor me, to teach me, to disciple me. So, again, because of society and the culture, Christian can't do this, and I'm a young fellow, I'm growing up. I got to play with what you mean I can't do this? So I was in and out, as it were, to the point where the label would be turned back, Turnbull.
Yeah.
But in 1968, when I made that recommitment to Jesus Christ, there was no turning back because I had it very clear. I got it straight. I understood it. So it didn't matter to me whether I had a crowd or didn't have a crowd. As you may have heard the story several times, there were several times in the early church, pastoring with just one person in the congregation, and I preached my heart out. As though the church was full. Because in my mind, in my heart, I had a bigger audience.
So you preached for the audience that you couldn't see.
Exactly.
And with the discipline of what you were.
With the understanding that I have one in front of me. But I heard heaven cheer. You can see I don't have it all together.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get to this point, but the truth is, I'm nobody special. But I have to tell you that God has always treated me special. So, from very young, I became very focused. All my other friends would get in drugs, all kind of stuff. I could have been on drugs. I could have even been dead. But God not only saved my soul, He literally saved my life. And we have this relationship. if you ever hear me talking to God, you would wonder, who is he talking to?
Yeah.
And so, being able to stay focused is what young and old leaders need. We need that more than ever before. The crowd will say, go on, we love you. That's this week. Later down in the week, not even next week, we hate your guts.
Yeah.
So they crown you today, crucify you tomorrow.
We saw that,
but
yeah.
you cannot be focused on the crowd. Your greatest audience must always be God.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
So I've seen people come, people go. People who said, I'll be there, turn around, they're not there. But you know what? I've also seen some faithful folks, and we have some of them here tonight. They came and stayed.
Yeah.
So a leader actually begets of his kind. You know what he says, everything after his kind? If you are faithful as a leader, it somehow trickles down to the people you lead.
Yeah.
People don't understand this. That's why you got to be careful who you're under, because you pick up the spirit of the leader.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to be careful to stay focused, to stay steady, and to understand what's really important so you can distinguish. So not only, as I said earlier, you should be close to the people, but more particularly, you've got to be connected and close to God.
Yeah.
So you can detect the difference between a push and a pull. I think you know where I'm at.
Yeah.
You know the story of the woman with the issue of blood.
Yeah.
Everybody's thronging around Jesus, pushing him. And then he said, somebody touch me. And the disciples, you got a crazy dude, everybody here. He said, no, somebody touch me. So
She extracted energy.
Yeah. That's the key. You got to know the pull.
So let me ask you
versus
about
the
that.
push.
As you transition from your early stages to, this goes into a balance.
Yeah.
Because when Jesus, as you said, alluded to, he was being pushed around, but the lady touched his hem and draw energy from him.
He felt the pull.
He felt the pull. As a leader, how do you find that balance between what you give, the pulling of emptying of yourself and being able to replenish that? Is that important?
It's
do you
critical.
just keep going and trying to save the world?
No.
Or do you find downtime? Do you always have to be turned on 24/7, leading, giving?
No.
Is that a recipe for disaster? Should you find balance?
It sure is. Disaster of all kinds.
Yeah.
I've seen preachers and pastors who try to save the world and lost their family. And I tell people, if you lose your family, you just about lost everything. So you have to strike that balance. You got to know how to rest. Because it is not by accident that God has given us 24 hours. And we learned in school, break it up into 3 sets of 8. You got to rest. So people ask me, because as you would know, for most of my ministry up until 2016, I was bivocational all throughout ministry. People ask me, how do you do it, Pastor? How do you strike this balance? When do you find time? And I said, listen, the truth of the matter is, everything I do, anything I do, complements each other. So where I was in banking or financial services, complemented ministry. Where I was in ministry, complemented where I worked. So striking the balance was easy because I understood that the principles were always transferable. So I'm not seeking just to be a good pastor or good banker. I'm seeking to be a good leader.
So you mentioned also something in terms of balance, in terms of rest, which is important. Which also, what is the importance of balance and finding that as a leader in terms of family?
Critical. Yeah. By the way, I tell folks all the time, my wife didn't marry a pastor, she married a man.
Yeah.
And I'm 100% man.
Yeah.
You didn't come this way by singing Amazing Grace. So here's the thing. I tell folks, before you can be anything, you got to be human first.
Yeah.
Period. So I had no qualms. I had no strange ideas that I came from heaven and I was Superman. No, I understood my limitations, but I also understood the unlimited power of God. And when the both meshed together, we became an unbeatable force. So I'm very pragmatic, very pragmatic. You would recall in the early days when it was just a few of us or just me, I had to do a whole lot of stuff. So I knew I had to drive the bus, I had to sing, I had to do all that. I did all that. But that was the beginning stage. I had to get it up, but always with the view that I got to build those around me. So how I find the balance was not trying to be everywhere, was to identify people that I can empower, mentor, whatever, and now we are good colleagues and allies working together. So striking the balance means, first, understand your source is God, but also understand that you're human. So you mesh the sovereignty of God, the all-powerfulness of God, with your human stuff, and you know your limitations. So, for example, when we got married, and that's an interesting story, we can't go there right now, but when we got married, we sat down and said, honey, we need to select a night. And I remember distinctly, it was Tuesday, just the two of us. And when you two guys came along, we said we need to have a night just for the whole family, the boys. That was Thursday night. I don't know if you remember any of that.
I was going to say Thursday.
Yeah, you got it.
We used to have pizzas from Virgin Cream.
Yeah. So I
wanted the pepperoni with the cheese.
Yeah. It's okay.
I used to pay attention.
Wonderful.
Even though no one thought I ever did.
Well, you got to be right. I'm surprised. I'm surprised by a lot of things you say now. Because, and I'm glad you brought it, because the truth of the matter is, I have learned, even though I don't understand everything, I have learned to trust the process. God says, if you do that, I will do this. I have learned the process. So I had no doubt, even though I may not have known, that you and your brother were listening and paying attention. And while I'm here, striking the balance means, as a preacher, I never preached at you guys.
Never.
I never preached at you all.
You know, that's interesting. I tell people that all the time. I mean, we used to pray and stuff like that. You know, I remember, especially when school began, or when there's something, I remember us praying as a family. But I think sometimes we didn't want to over pray.
Yes. And if you had a choice, you probably wouldn't, huh?
Well, the praying thing, I never got it until I was older.
I understand.
Because I was like, we'll close our eyes. Why don't we just, anyway.
Never mind.
Don't get distracted by lack of attention, right?
Yeah.
But growing up with you as a leader, you're right. Now, I'm saying this because you guys never lecture. I mean, if we did something, but the more lessons that we learn, we're caught. We observed them.
Exactly.
I looked at the proclivities, because you will pick up that more, because you won't remember every single thing, but you remember what you felt, what you saw, what you observed. So you're correct.
So no matter how busy I was, and I was busy, I told folks back then and even now, I could have been out every night, because then I started counseling, marriage counseling very early. I could have been out every night. But again, I selected Tuesday. No matter what the thing was, unless it was an emergency, I have a date. I have an appointment on Tuesday. They don't need to know what it is. So the point of the matter is this. You got to set your pace, set your priorities. Know what's important. Because not everything that's urgent is important.
Yeah.
And so striking the balance, being a human being, loving my wife, treating her the best I can, loving my sons, treating them the best way, spending as much time as I could with them, that is critical. And boy, did I have fun too. I worked. When I remember, man, it's like yesterday. When I come home from work on a Friday, guess what I used to do?
Yeah.
There was wrestling, but before wrestling, there was
our wrestling. Well, I remember that.
Okay, go back a little further.
Before we were there?
Boss Hogg.
Oh.
You know that show?
No, I don't know that show.
Anybody remember Boss Hogg? Yeah. I used to come home looking forward to that show. That's how I chilled. That's how I unwind. So it's necessary to have rest physically, emotionally, spiritually. It's critical to strike that balance. Very critical.
Yeah, so we've been gleaning so many different lessons over this period of time. Now, as you transition, that was, trying to sum up or talk about 40 plus years of leadership in an hour, it's not possible.
No.
But as you're now in a threshold of leading through so many different transitions, politically, transitions in country, in growth economically in this country, and seeing the evolution of different leaders and climates in which you lead, in this time that we're filming this in 2021, what would you say leadership is requiring now and for the next several years to come?
Yeah, well, first of all, it starts with yourself. You got to lead yourself before you can lead anything. Manage yourself before you can manage anything. But I've come up with 3 things that I think defines me now and in the future. Apart from making sure I reproduce leaders, and that's one of the reasons we started the school. But there are 3 things, if I should put it in a nutshell. There's so many things, but I am determined and have learned and continue to learn how to live to the full. Live to the full and strive to die empty. What does that look like? I've decided for the rest of my life to live with nothing to prove. I mean, it has always characterized my life, but more intentional now. I don't have anything to prove to anybody. I don't have anything to prove, so I don't need to show off. I don't need to talk about my accomplishments. I don't need any of that. Nothing to prove.
Yeah.
The other one is I really am learning to live with nothing to hide, to be authentic, honest, open. And that includes exposing myself, my knowledge, whatever, to whomever. I think you understand this, you know this. It doesn't matter who it is. Once I see you, you could be my son, I treat you like that. I see you, you could be my daughter, I treat you like that. And a lot of leaders, they try to hold positions and hold information and hold everything. That's not a way to live. That's not the mark of a true leader. Live with nothing to hide. Be transparent, be open, be authentic.
Yeah.
But I also learn to live with nothing to lose. See, if you're crucified with Christ, and again, this is something that I believed a long time ago. I tell folks, literally, you can't kill me, I'm already dead. I'm crucified with Christ. The most you can do is harm this flesh, but you can't touch the real me. And so what that means, when I live like that, I live without fear. What's the worst you can do to me? So I've gone places, did things that people were afraid of, because I said the worst they can do is say no. And don't be afraid of failure. Failure just means you got to try one more time and harder than the first time. And I think what's wrong with this generation is that they have not learned how to fail. You can't really appreciate success without failure.
Yeah.
So, wow, we're going to have to do this. We haven't even touched the surface. But if I could speak to the leaders of our country and
Future leaders
of the
to come.
church,
Yeah. Country, church.
this is what I would say. Because one of the things I realized is we have a big problem in this country and around the world. And as you know, one of my pet peeves is duplicity. Say one thing and do another. And I tell folks all the time, you can't be the king and the priest at the same time. And that's one of the things we're seeing in this country as well as around the world. Where because, like Saul, you've hung around David, or Samuel for that matter, you think you can do this. You remember the story. There was supposed to be an occasion where Samuel and Saul would meet to have the ceremony.
Yeah.
Well, Samuel, for whatever reason, was late. And Saul decided, well, I'm going to do this. I've been around. I see how it's done. I'm going to do it. He made a mess.
Yeah.
And one of the things I find as spiritual leaders, we have to blame ourselves for where the world is and for where our nation is. Because we are moving at the whims and fancy of everybody else rather than God. If anybody ought to take the lead, and I tell folks all the time, the greatest position that you can have is that spiritual position as a man of God or woman of God. Anything else, the best it can be is lateral, but really it's a downward step. We have the highest office in the land, but a lot of us don't know who we are. And hence when we see what we think is an opportunity to be in the favor of quote unquote the king, we run for this. We forget our principles. We try to have friends in high places, not understanding that we have the greatest friend in the highest place. So there's a lot of compromising. And because of that, the world is in darkness. I can't help but reflect on what happened in Jamaica. In the 21st century, man, 2021, can you imagine that people would give up their rights, give up their soul to one man?
Yeah.
When anybody controls you that much, that ought to say something to you.
As we started off, to circumvent a conversation,
yeah.
Leadership is about influence.
Exactly.
And you can use it to help.
Yes, sir.
Or to harm.
Mm-hmm.
And even when you're in that position, you have to realize what are you using your leadership influence for.
Exactly.
But talking about this king and priest, mm-hmm. and what you would advise leaders to do, what would you say? What would you tell them?
Yeah. Well,
it's almost sounds like you're saying, if you're on this side, lead from this side, mm-hmm. appreciate where you are. If you're in Christian and spiritual leadership, mm-hmm. understand how important that is, yeah. and cherish it and honor it, mm-hmm. so you're not easily manipulated and led away from what you deem not important, because it doesn't have the trimmings of what the king has.
Exactly. So let's clarify this. This matter of separation of church and state, that's American stuff. That's other nation stuff. Yeah. The only delineation you should have, because God must be everywhere, but you must not let everywhere be in God. Let me explain. It's okay for the church, the people of God, to be in politics. In fact, we need more Christians. I'm not talking about religious people, because we have a religious spirit all over the world that's destroying the world, and it's rampant even here. I'm not talking about a religious spirit. I'm talking about people who have a right relationship with God and understand that. So in order to lead, you love God and you love people. And if you love people, you can't mistreat them, you can't abuse them, you can't manipulate them. You're going to just have to love them. So here's the thing. I would say to our Christian leaders, because some hide behind, I'm not from here. Well, I'm not from here either. Somebody said, well, yeah, we're going to send them home tomorrow. No, that's not what I mean. As believers, we're heavenly citizens first. We belong to another kingdom, which is God. We are ambassadors for Christ. Our headquarters is in heaven. So it doesn't matter where we are on the earth. The truth is we don't belong there, but we must make a difference where we are planted.
Yeah.
So you can't hide behind that excuse, because the earth is the Lord's.
Yeah.
But we only do that when it's convenient.
Yeah.
We need to stand up and speak up. And I want to say to our people too, because the people have a role to play. We have got to stop being so placid And I like the early church, because even those of us who preach the gospel, we need to preach and teach our congregation to be independent from the standpoint of searching the scriptures from yourself. I don't care how articulate, I don't care how charismatic the leader is. If he is talking rubbish, you wouldn't know unless you know the scriptures.
Yeah.
And if you know the scriptures and he's not in the scripture, or she, shut it down. I don't care how beautiful this song.
So, as we're winding down our conversation, I want to give you one last opportunity to do a couple of things.
Okay.
Imagine that the world is still here 100 years from now. None of us in this room, some of us maybe, will be here. King Garden Baptist Church still exists.
Oh.
And they go and pull the archives from 100 years ago.
Whoa.
And they find this tape. What would you tell that church?
Wow. The fact that you found this tape is because it was divinely ordained. I couldn't see into 100 years from now. But the fact that you found this tape and you're watching it right now is to show you that the struggles you have are not new. And the God who kept me 100 years ago is the same God that will keep you. The faces of the challenges may change, but the solution remains the same. So my word to you, now that you got this tape, people come, people go, generations change, but God's mercy is forever. And God's grace is sufficient. So straighten up your back and stop complaining, because you are living for another 100 years. Because this would now make it 2 that I'll be removed from here. So whatever you do, don't do it for today. Do it for the next generation and the next generation. And until he comes or calls for you, stay on the battlefield. Don't compromise. Don't come down off the wall. Don't try to please everybody. Your greatest audience, we go back where we started, must always remain God. Because here's the good news. The same trumpet that I heard is the same trumpet that you will hear. And the same words that I'm looking forward to hear, and by this time I would have heard, well done. And watch what he says. Not eloquent, not articulate, not brilliant, although I may be all that. That's not what he focuses on. Well done, thou good. Be good. You remember Grandpa? Be good. Thou good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'm going to make you rule over many things. So straighten up yourself. You're not a little puny little thing. You're not a little dot. I know the challenges have changed, and I know, well, what we used to boast about, cell phone and being able to do, I can't imagine what you guys are doing today. But guess what? It's the same God. He never changes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you've joined us and you're watching this, we just want to thank you for joining us. This has been a leadership series that has been inspiring, heartwarming, thoughtful, but God-centered. And we want to thank the humility of our senior pastor, Reverend Dr. Melvin Turnbull, for being able to be so transparent, authentic, and being able to share with us things that we'll be able to rewatch and learn. So whether you're in leadership now, thinking about going into leadership, in the midst of leadership, stand firm. take courage, and remember, your biggest audience is God. We thank you on behalf of our senior pastor, First Lady, and the leaders here at our Kingdom Baptist Church. We invite you to join us on Sundays at 10:30. We have Refuel on Wednesdays, and all the other small groups where we gather, we grow, and we give. We hope that you gather with us and experience God's love in this interview. I'm sure happy that you've grown. And here's what. Give this back to others. Share it, like it, and let's all become leaders in our own right. Reverend Dr. Melvin A. Turnbull, my father.
Well, let me say this, man. Folks may not know this. I tell those who I can that your brother and you and I'm not just your father. We're not just sons and father. We're friends. And you have no idea what it feels like. I had the privilege of pastoring my mother and my father and a whole lot of other people. They were able to see me in the pulpit and everywhere. You will never understand what it's like for me to be here, sit and watch you, and to know that the Church of Jesus Christ is in good hands. Stay humble. Stay teachable. And as I told your brothers when you both were going off to school, you said, Paul, there's nothing too high,
Nothing too hard.
nothing too good, nothing too hard.
On that note, thank you for joining us. Did you make mistakes as a leader early on?
As early as about 7 years, I can recall doing things that children ought not to be doing. I don't know what I said, but it seemed to work because everything seemed to be better after that.
Yeah.
But the truth is, you're not a leader unless you're a follower.
Yeah.
You can call yourself a leader, but if you have no following, you're not a leader. You're just fooling yourself. A leader actually begets of his kind. I think it ought to be comforting for all of us. The truth of the matter is, God doesn't usually call qualifiers, but he qualifies the one he calls. So I'm not seeking just to be a good pastor or a good banker. I'm seeking to be a good leader.